Some stories are able to create a world so remarkable and so impactful that those fictional settings become synonymous with the actual story itself. This idea can extend to the point of the world being considered a character of its very own, tying everything together. And in the Pokemon series, there's no place more fitting to that description than the original game's setting, the Kanto region of Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow. Even at this point so many years later, Kanto seems etched into Pokemon's very soul. A tight but flexible map design, a bold selection of landmarks, and an ensemble of lovable characters all work to make it good then and continue to hold up now. Well, depending on who you ask, I guess. But they sure thought it worked. Kanto has been the subject of seemingly countless stories within the Pokemon world, across the games, anime, and other extended media where it's been further explored and imagined as a place to tell stories. They just keep coming back to it. The region has been physically expanded upon in all of these instances, and even remade several times because it is such a happening place. But one of these stories is not like the others. Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen show us a version of Kanto that, at a glance, appears very standard and mostly in line with the original, these games being remakes of the original Red and Blue. But after getting the 7th badge on Sevii Island, we're suddenly shown something a little bit different. The friendly researcher, Bill, appears outside the gym, in a boat no less, and asks if you want to go somewhere new. And after a quick boat ride, you soon find yourself in an entirely different region, the Sevii Islands. A series of numbered islands, 1 through 7, all with their own unique adventures and intrigue. Out of the gate, things are very different here from the usual for the Pokemon experience. The hustle and bustle of the typical Pokemon city has been replaced with a quiet and rural countryside, populated by laid-back locals who prefer a more peaceful life. The physical geography of this archipelago is a lot more open and rugged compared to the northern mainland, and the undeveloped landscapes make for one-of-a-kind exploration in a seemingly untouched world. In fact, one of the main reasons the player is brought to the islands and adventures across them is to help set up the network infrastructure for the region, as these islands are just now gaining access to the digital framework that's been commonplace in the other regions of the world. So the adventure that takes place here, on this archipelago drifting in time, follows the region's changes as it actively develops and catches up to the present. This process is the core of the Sevii Islands, and the core of my fascination with them. Because of the region's multi-stage presentation, we get to experience the rare snapshot of a world, not just in motion, but in complete and entire upheaval. The people of this country love their quiet life, but also know that change is on the horizon. And over the course of the story, we get to see those changes up close and personal. New people from other countries move in, commerce and trade from Kanto gets established, and biggest of all, a connection is created with the network systems of the world. With these developments, the Sevii Islands are thrust into the modernity of the other regions. The future for these people is filled with uncertainty, but it's a brave world filled with possibilities. And so what happens next? I don't really know. These changes being put into action is actually the end of the Sevii Island story, leaving what actually comes as a result of the modernization completely up to player interpretation. We don't get to see it. The last actions that you as the player take are kicking out the Team Rocket faction that has set up shop on the islands, and getting the necessary materials to the network administrator to connect to the other regions. Which leaves the story on the note of all the possibilities that could come to be as a result of this. But equally tragically, this is the final moment from the islands and the series at large. To this day, 20 plus years later, Pokemon has not returned to Kanto's awkward little brother. All that we're left with are fragments and memories of a lost Pokemon region. But this place is definitely worth remembering, as there isn't really any other like it anywhere else in Pokemon. The regions are usually so packed with landmarks and things to do one after another, but the opposite is true on these islands. Paths between locations are vaguely defined and open-ended, and when combined with the look of the chewed-up countryside, you get a place that actually feels adventurous and wild, in addition to just physically looking that way. Places like Sevii Canyon and Ruin Valley already look untouched by the people of the world, but the ups and downs and jagged rocks sticking out everywhere lends them an atmosphere just short of danger, like you're really exploring. On other islands though, the same features can just as easily offer the calm and quiet of a rustic countryside. Winding greenery, seemingly just for its own sake, surrounded by water flows or oceans of trees, creates places of peace, where it feels like the point, if there even is one, is just being out here and enjoying it. And with all of it comes a population that both feels just right and completely out of place in Pokemon. This place has the further benefit of being a post-game adventure, so the tutorials, facts, and pointers that are so common during the main journey are practically out the window. And instead the NPCs offer the mundane nothings of everyday life in the country, the ribbon on top that ties together this unusual scenario. In some ways, the entire picture here is almost antithetical to one of Pokemon's most core themes, connectedness, as this is a very disconnected place. The lack of a network system, most overtly, but also the physical presentation of distant locales spread across a sea of scattered islands makes for an interesting lens to consider the ways that people come together. This shift in environment, atmosphere, and even the themes make for one of the most fascinating places in all of Pokemon. And it's downright tragic that we've never been given its proper ending or follow-through for this borderline mystical place. But Pokemon as a whole is an extremely connected universe, and the games will frequently reference or make nods to previous titles. Even after the dust is settled, we might hear a follow-up or two somewhere else down the road. And so maybe with those connections, we could cobble together a picture of what happened to the Sevii Islands after the protagonist journeyed through them, despite not being granted an actual physical return. So let's walk through the rest of the series after FireRed and LeafGreen and look for every possible reference or clue to the memory and future of the islands. Maybe then we can get some answers. And just for good measure, let's also check out the real-world legacy these islands have left in anything outside the mainline series. This is an extremely important stretch of game to me, probably the most in the entire series, and its odd positioning makes me wonder how the company and surrounding media pieces remember and portray it, if at all. Following FireRed and LeafGreen, the next time we as players would hear tell of the islands in the games themselves would be 3 generations down the line in X and Y. While that might not seem like an awfully long time to hear something about a separate game, because yeah, just fair enough, it stands out to me because Kanto proper would be discussed and looked back upon only 1 game later, with Professor Oak making his way to the Sinnoh region in Diamond and Pearl, where after showing you some stuff in the post-game, he kinda just hangs out. They made it a single game before inserting Kanto into another region. Then you could of course straight up go to Kanto in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and then it's in a subtle way I really appreciate, but they also snuck it into Black and White as well. All of which is to further describe that they love their callbacks and interconnected stories, so it's really weird how little the Sevii Islands got looked at. But I digress. Here in X and Y, we can find someone at the Hotel Richissime who seems to have visited Sevii and gives some insight on the trip. This girl on the 5th floor of the hotel, in a particularly fancy looking room, states, "Oh, what a gorgeous space. It's just like Resort Gorgeous," referring to the location by the same name at the northern end of 5 Island. And you might be thinking here, Droomish, this is nothing. It's barely a callback as much as it's barely fan service. And I sort of agree, hence the readily available straw man. But there is something that does really fascinate me about this line, considering its physical context. Look at the 2 places she's comparing. Hotel Richissime, this incredible, gigantic hotel, bathed in the life of luxury with every amenity you could possibly imagine, versus Resort Gorgeous, which is just this. A single 1-room cottage on a tiny stretch of beach. And don't get me wrong, I really, really like Resort Gorgeous. It's ornamental, it's cute, it's really just lovely. But to compare this to this, while sitting in a place this fancy, feels sort of strange. Of course, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, beauty that I'm surrounded with, by the way. But this line makes me think that Resort Gorgeous saw some serious development as a tourist destination after the protagonist journeyed there. Because it's very plausible and realistic that with developing infrastructure and forces of globalization being applied to the islands, an already well-off enough place like the resort could grow to a point of being compared to this hotel. The resort very well may have ballooned in size and offerings, as the money already present in the establishment positions it well to be one of the first new developments like this in the region. And since X and Y vaguely take place so much later after FireRed and LeafGreen, this line seems like a soft confirmation that those original changes ended up having some major effects. And this is normally where we would move on, but you know what? We're already here at the hotel. When else am I gonna get a chance to talk about this? I have to rant a little about the in-game criteria for talking to this NPC, because it is ridiculous and infuriating. This girl is on the 5th floor of the hotel during the bed-making minigame, which, just from the name, is clearly indicative of a fantastic time. I sure can't think of anything more fun than making beds for hotel goers. But this minigame, for some reason, and the other little hotel staff games alongside it, have some actual depth to them. This one entails making all the beds on a hotel floor under a certain time limit. Making the beds is just a quick press of the A button, quick and easy, but the challenge is charting the quickest course across the hotel floor while avoiding extremely obnoxious obstacles, like people running around in circles or guys moving furniture, seemingly for no reason other than pissing me off. Get out of my way, guy ambling around in the doorway I'm trying to move through. But you know, it's not a huge deal, because it's a short game, and it only takes about 90 seconds at most to get through, so why am I so irritated? The game has levels that correlate with the floor that you're on, and the 5th floor is the final level. How do you unlock the final level? Oh, just beat the game a measly 50 times, and you can only play once per day. And if you mess up a day, like because Jimbo Doorway over here blocked a key entrance, that day is shot. So why am I looking at an at least 50-day journey to read a small piece of world building hid behind an army of hotel beds? Even worse, it's one that I really care about, something that I've been searching high and low for. But I also find it intriguing in a way, because by virtually every other metric, this is pointless. It doesn't matter. This isn't an actual collectible or some arcane mechanic. It's just gossip. Offhand cultural information about another time and another place. So I guess it is a lot different. The actual reward here is just money, and a lot of it. So I guess I don't think it's unfair, really, rather than it's absurd that something like this would be buried so far back in the game. It's just a really odd and interesting inclusion. But, okay, damn. Kind of a weird tangent there, but I'm cool. Don't worry. So let's go ahead and look at the next one. Echoes of the Sevii Islands would next be felt in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire's Delta episode, the remake-only post-game story that paid homage to the original Emerald through a new adventure about stopping a meteor from hitting the Earth. It's a pretty fun little sequence, all things considered, but where it really stands out is in the character interactions and storytelling it offers. The actual gameplay isn't always exactly riveting, but it's definitely worth getting the backstory and drama presented in this narrative at least once. The whole thing culminates in this legendary cutscene where you're riding on the back of Mega Rayquaza, in outer space no less, and you charge straight into the meteor and blast it to pieces. And then out from the remains comes this little black triangle, which is ultimately our subject of interest in this specific moment. The triangle eventually reveals the almighty Deoxys hiding inside of it for an unbelievable duel in outer space, but not before performing this strange movement pattern, jumping from side to side while these very alien noises are being made. This doesn't seem to mean anything new in the actual moment, but rather a cool callback to the original Deoxys event that occurred on the Sevii Islands. With a special boat ticket distributed through Mystery Gift, you could gain access to Birth Island, a small, triangle-shaped mass of ground south of 6th Island. To get Deoxys to appear though, you need to move what is presumably the same black triangle in its weird little pattern until it rests in the center of the island. And that's really the whole story on this one. While it is technically tied to the Sevii Islands, this one is much more of an Easter egg than a reference we can spin any substance out of. It's still pretty plainly fantastic though, even from that lens, because it's just plainly cool when these games demonstrate that they remember where they came from. But I also happen to be a bit delusional when it comes to this Pokemon lore stuff, so I do want to try and point out some potential intrigue about this connection. For one, it's kind of weird and cool that Deoxys' home base in the mainline games is technically on the Sevii Islands instead of in Hoenn, even though the creature is a Gen 3 Pokemon. The event uniquely ran in FireRed, LeafGreen, and Emerald, which is kind of surreal because it's a physical location that can be visited from both Kanto and Hoenn. You know, two places that exist so distinctly apart from each other. And so there's this tiny kernel here for the dream of the Pokemon game that spans multiple regions. In this case, you have to do something particularly complicated and put some pieces together in your head, but just being able to do it at all feels powerful to me. This is one of 2 locations in the games where Brendan from Hoenn can stand in the exact same spot as Red from Kanto, and that just feels extremely cool to wrap my head around. Clearly the event's main cultural association is with Emerald though, because that's how it's getting remembered at this later point in the Delta episode, but we would be remiss to not remember where it all originally went down, here on the Sevii Islands. The other thing about this that's sort of intriguing me is the movement pattern of the triangle itself. If it just happened once in a single game, I could chalk it up to just being a neat little puzzle someone cooked up to add flair to an in-game event. In the original instance, to get the triangle to move and ultimately summon Deoxys, you have to interact with the triangle and then take the minimum possible number of steps before you interact again. If you do, it keeps going through the pattern, but if you don't, it resets. That feels like pretty classic D&D or just general RPG fanfare, sure. But the same movement happening a second time under completely different circumstances makes me think it actually means something. That maybe this triangle is actually some form of universal constant and not just happenstance on a random island. So let me really ponder this one for a moment. Okay, I think I got it. This triangle could be deeply symbolic and thematic for Deoxys' entire existence. Deoxys is a Pokemon deeply defined by change. Its existence was the result of a sudden mutation, and it's able to swap between 4 different forms, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. In math and science, the symbol delta often represents the function of change, be it for a change of energy or a change in the slope of a line. In addition to this, an important component of change when it comes to processes is attempting to take the path that is efficient as possible in order to conserve energy, or in other words, take the minimum possible number of steps, just like our mutating space creature. Deoxys even brings this symbolism out into gameplay with it, as whenever you use it in a battle, you're beholden to the 3 dots on its back, both in the shape of a triangle and in the shape of change. What an absolutely beautiful puzzle this is, and such a beautiful Pokemon to go alongside it. Oh, I love these games so much. But that's enough daydreaming for now. Let's get back to the islands. For this one, I want to take a brief interlude from the games and look at an episode of the TV show. Just on its face, this one episode is fascinating and a bit of an anomaly, as it's the only one in the entire gigantic anime series run that visits Sevy, which I suppose I kind of understand, but again, it's really such wasted potential, and I think the quality of this episode really speaks to that. This singular outing comes from the Pokemon Chronicles anthology series, which follows side characters that Ash met in the main series going on their own little one-off adventures. And so without the pretense of Ash's grand quest and all the annoyingness that can come with him, you actually get something extremely fun because you're just thrown into these interesting situations in and around the universe. There's no messing around or deliberation because they really just can't afford to. Here we're following one of Ash's old rivals, Richie, as he takes an impromptu stop on one island to join the adventurer Silver. And no, not that Silver, as he searches for the legendary fire-type Moltres atop Mount Ember. But watch out, because drama ensues when Team Rocket tries to mess it all up. So yeah, it's pretty great. It's only one locale out of the entire archipelago, but it is really gratifying to see Mount Ember explored in full animation rather than just the pixel set of the Game Boy Advance. I was honestly kind of shocked how much I thoroughly enjoyed this episode, but I think it kind of speaks to how strong an anthology style can work for this universe. The most interesting character in Pokemon is often the world itself, so getting to see a disconnected story taking place in the Sevii Islands ultimately highlights what I love about playing it on the console rather than making me wish Ash had properly journeyed here over a larger arc. This episode feels like a snapshot of the way of life I'm interested in, and it hits all the important notes along the way without dragging. It also certainly doesn't hurt that it's driven by a small cast of characters that are interacting in fun ways. Even if it was just for a 22-minute moment of TV, Richie's joining up with the hunt, partially because of his desire to not be seen as a little kid, is pretty captivating. And Silver's quest to fight Moltres by any means necessary, but still being a pretty good guy himself, made me pay really close attention to him. Overall, it's still absurd they chose to go here a single time over the course of a literal 1,000+ episodes, but this is a worthy outing that pays respect to at least a component of what I love about the Sevii Islands so much. Rigorous adventure in search of the world's legends. This brings us to Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, with our most straightforward callback yet. In the coastal town of Melee City, we can find someone actually from the islands hanging out in the ferry terminal. First, he kindly gives you a nugget. Gotta love it when strangers hand you lumps of gold with no strings attached. And then he describes how the Alola region is similar to his homeland of the Sevii Islands, both being countries made of islands distantly spread across oceans of water. Back at home, he was able to dig up tons of nuggets like the one he just gave up, so now he's handing them out wherever he goes. What a great guy. And he even mentioned my favorite place verbatim, so that's a sweet piece of bonus fan service. But this is just some random guy, and he almost vagrantly mentions the islands, and has so little to say about them. So it might seem like nothing more than an empty name drop, especially with how the Ultra games are absolutely packed with references and Easter eggs for other regions. One of the coolest draws for these games is how many characters of note from other stories are wandering around Alola, following up on previous adventures with new opportunities to check in with them. It is cool as hell to run into Wally, Grimsley, Colress, Blue, or any one of these characters taking their next steps in Alola. It is the exact same reason I actually love getting to encounter this random guy, because even though he doesn't give us a name or have a unique overworld look, this presence is the follow-through on several generations of storytelling, because we can actually meet this guy in other games all throughout Pokemon's history. Chronologically, he's first found on Sevii's 3 Island in FireRed and LeafGreen, where he's mining for gold in this cave off to the side of the island's port. Initially, the cave is very tiny and cramped, where he explains he's prospecting for gold, and that when he gets rich, he's gonna buy a house in Kanto, something we'll follow up on in a moment. Currently, he doesn't really do anything, and neither does the cave, if you can even call it one. But after you beat the Elite Four and get the National Pokédex, you know, things that normally take a bit of time and adventure to achieve for yourself, you'll return to a completely different cave, where the man's mining operation has turned the tiny room into a long and spacious opening with chipped rocks and boulders littered along the way. While you were getting stuff done around Kanto, he hit it big and accomplished his gold mining dreams. And now he's got so much gold, he's practically handing it out. In addition to this, he's punched a hole through the other side of the cave and exposed this open-air cliffside that's home to a colony of Dunsparce, a Pokemon that you can't find anywhere else in the game. And for me, this is really something. Not the Dunsparce in specific, but this complete presentation. This cave and this guy are something of an emblem for me for what makes the Sevii Islands, and Pokemon as a whole even, to a certain extent, so incredibly magical. Like a lot of RPGs, there's sort of a weird deal with the flow of time inside Pokemon games. You know there's timed events, sure, like something happening every Sunday, but the physical and narrative progression of the world, like with our guy in the cave, is usually linked to completing the various objectives throughout a game's story. And so there's often this dilemma in play, because you really want to feel like time is passing and the world is changing around you while you play, but you also need to be progressing your characters and hitting the story beats as you go. It requires a very careful balance on the game's end, because managing that dilemma is a key factor in the game feeling immersive, and ultimately even the beauty or joy that can be found in that game's story. And simply because it just feels good when it feels real. And I'm not gonna mince words here, at least any more than I already have, but Pokemon is often extremely bad at this balance. Nothing better exemplifies it than the ham-fisted roadblocks they have frequently used to bar you from going beyond a certain point too early. All of which is to say that on the other hand, I think the Nugget guy and this delivery are perfect. I'm definitely making kind of an unfair comparison against the roadblocks here, and if you want those more seriously dissected, you should definitely check out this recent video I did on them. But the Nugget guy in specific is one of those things that creates the multi-stage presentation of the islands I mentioned at the beginning. We're living through the change with developments like these, and because it's so unobtrusive, it's also like the world evolved around us rather than us accomplishing some mission. And we can find little pieces like this all across FireRed and LeafGreen as we progress. So yeah, this guy and the feeling he gave me while I was playing these games as a kid is an extremely special one to me. But anyways, he follows up giving out the nugget in the cave with this cheeky one-liner about how since he doesn't have a nugget of wisdom to share, this one will have to do instead. Which is the exact same line that this guy shares in the Gen 2 games after also offering up a nugget. So I guess everything worked out for him. Even without a name, this is almost assuredly the same guy because of the little catchphrase. So we can see he hit it big on the Sevii Islands and then bought that house in Kanto he was talking about. Here it is. A little bit out of the way, for sure, but it looks like a pretty nice place to settle down. And then at some further point down the road, he decided he was tired of the quiet life and journeyed the world, handing out gold to anyone who would listen to his story. Like this guy on Route 229 in Gen 4 certainly sounds like him while doing the same thing. And of course, we also find him where we originally checked in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. I just love subtle follow through like this that happens across canons. For one, it really paints the picture of a living and breathing universe to have ongoing characters you can keep up with like this. But I think even more so, it's valuable for that to be the case with regular people, so to speak, because it makes that universe feel so lived in. Like, I do similarly think it's cool how the trajectory of a character like Lance can be tracked across several games, but he's this ultra famous Power Ranger type guy, so it doesn't give any major insight on the culture and behaviors of the general population. And that's why this guy is so great. It's the life and times of a completely regular person in the Pokemon world. But does it actually tell us anything about the future of the Sevii Islands? Do these cross-game appearances actually speak to possible changes for the region? Well, it definitely shows the islands as resource-rich in regards to these gold veins. So we at least know that the Sevii Islands could theoretically activate a We Love the King Day in a game of Civ 5. But more broadly, there's probably something to be considered here for possible migration and financial investment in the islands, as incredibly valuable natural resources are being discovered during a time of major infrastructure upgrades. So this is probably further indication that big lifestyle and development changes came to the islands after FireRed and LeafGreen. And if this guy is still traveling the world and spreading his wealth this much later, the amount of gold found was probably pretty significant. So altogether, this could combine to paint a preliminary picture to that of the 1800s California gold rush, where people came from far and wide to try and get their hands on the resource. I don't think it's that likely to be something so extreme though, mainly on account of how extremely infrequently they talk about the islands, but it's definitely another piece to indicate that some major change is probably on the way. People moving in, operations in the works, that kind of thing. Our next entry is simultaneously the latest mainline reference, while also being the earliest chronologically. Legends Arceus, despite being based in ancient Sinnoh, is filled with origins and distant backstories for tons of characters and places across the entire series, and the Sevii Islands are no exception for that love. Again, it's always just so cool to see Pokemon remember where it came from, but this one feels especially good because Arceus has a story revolving around the origins and ancestors of the Pokemon world. So to see the name Sevii here makes it feel like it was all part of the plan, so to speak, and that the region has a pervasive history in Pokemon's overarching lore. It's a bit of a subtle nod though, so let's actually get down to business with it. This building near the entrance to Jubilife City is the Sevii Kitchen, a clearly inspired namesake to my beloved islands. You could very easily make it to the entire game without even realizing it though. There's no main story interaction with the small facility, and you can't even go inside of it either. It's primarily denoted by a little marker on the city's map. Sevii Kitchen. Obviously not a ton to go on, but it's really cool to see it represented in Pokemon's contemporary lore like this. And it probably means that this girl Radisa, who runs the kitchen, is vaguely from the actual islands in some way. A handful of the other regions get name dropped and referred to like well-established countries all across Arceus, and it all points to how connected the Pokemon world is, even at this distant point in its past. Other than that, we've just got a few quests here to do with cooking rather than the kitchen's namesake. So really nothing too complex here, but to see Sevii referenced at all in a 2022 Pokemon game, a whole 18 years later, has me personally over the moon. The legend lives on. That's really the extent of it in the mainline games. But before closing out, let's hit some more of the series' extended media related to the subject, as I'm again very interested in seeing the extracurricular nods to the region. What sort of memory do the creators themselves have for this fascinating region? One place for answers like this is Pokemon's world-spanning gacha game, Pokemon Masters EX. And I'm not a super fan of the game or anything, I don't think I even have it installed at the time of writing this, but it really is perfect for stuff like the subject we're on right now. The game pulls characters from across Pokemon's entire back catalog, and then you get to fight and interact with those characters in a universe that's kind of outside the timelines and canon in order to have everyone all at once. The primary gameplay loop is fine enough, but if you love Pokemon's overarching lore, especially to do with its characters, there's really something special here with all the different little scenarios and chats you can have with the universe's extended cast. Like, check this out. I went and reinstalled the game, and now I'm having an in-depth discussion with Agatha about the optics of Golbat vampirism. Where else am I gonna get this type of interaction? So case in point, there's been a couple of decent tidbits in memory of the islands from this game. Like a gold-focused event that ran a few times over the years alludes to the gold mining guy as a strange man, but with some further soft confirmation that the guy in Gen 2 and then in Gen 4 are all the same guy. We also get to concretely see a Sevii location with Lorelei, as her special move animation puts her in front of a background of Icefall Cave, a small dungeon on her home of Four Island. Now this one is an extremely subtle touch. They don't even talk about it. You have to know that that's what it is, but I still feel particularly moved by this one in a certain way. Lorelei got some added lore in FireRed and LeafGreen over her original Gen 1 counterpart, and it's described how these islands are her home, and she worries about their safety from people like Team Rocket while she's attending to her duties at the Pokemon League. It really lends a deeper and more sympathetic side to her as a character, and so it's kind of heartwarming for me that even though she remains a Kanto big dog in the games, because like that was basically her role in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, the extended universe still chooses to symbolize her through her origins, and deep down, she still loves where she came from. Other than Masters, we've got a couple of web pages in memory of the islands on Pokemon's official websites. The US page for FireRed and LeafGreen is a bit of a letdown, but also about what I'd expect for an in-house pamphlet like this. A couple paragraphs about why the games were a big deal when they came out, and then 2 little sentences advertising the islands at the end. I do really like these screenshots they have at the bottom though. These grainy little pictures that actually feel pretty candid to someone's experience. So it's like a little scrapbook rather than strictly promotional. But the Japanese website has a lot more on these games, with an entire page on the journey across Sevy, with a list of things to try out or explore across the 7 main islands. And I don't know any Japanese, and I'm just using my terrible browser-based translator, but the general vibe here is so good for what the islands are at their core. There's adventure and mysticism on these islands, just waiting to be found by players. Then they've also got this other page that has these special climate and geography reports from the first 6 regions, where the Kanto page has an extra little blurb about the islands, highlighting some of the touristy spots worth visiting. Again, I'm going off of vibes and the bad translation, but the raw feeling of this presentation is something special, and it really comes through how much they care about these regions, as this especially is way more creative writing than anything else. It almost feels like a travel guide or vacation blog. I'm gonna leave the link for all of these in the description if you want to explore them for yourself, so give them a look if you're so inclined, because it's a lot of fun. And that brings us to our final and perhaps ultimate stop on this journey, the Pokemon Adventures manga. Adventures is an official manga adaptation of the world portrayed in the mainline games, and while it isn't strictly canon to them in any real way, it does follow the plotlines and character portrayals of the games much more closely than the anime does, but often does so with added maturity and speculative answers on how this world works. Characters are given deeper and more complex portrayals across a relatively intricately connected plot that all works towards making the story of the games into focused and compelling dramas. And for me, Adventures is a great example, perhaps even the great example, of what makes Pokemon the magical thing that it is. When you play a Pokemon game for the first time, or really any time with enough whimsy in your heart, there's a lot of imagining to be done. These games are always relatively cohesive, but a huge part of the magic is the parts that are left sort of unclear, because that's when you, the person playing the game, gets to step in and control the story. You control the experience, and you speculate about what you're not seeing from this narrow perspective. I wonder what this guy's story is. Why does this Pokemon live in this habitat? What events transpired over this stretch of time? And then just by engaging with lines of thought like those, you create answers. You create an atmosphere for yourself, and you create a deep and personal feeling with a world that gives you the pieces needed to submerge yourself in the rest. And Pokemon Adventures feels like a possible end result of that type of engagement, a complete pen-to-paper realization of an attempt to make sense of this world, to make it all feel real. And one of the story's highlights is the FireRed and LeafGreen arc, primarily focusing on our protagonists Red, Blue, and Green journeying through the Sevii Islands. And while it was originally printed some time ago, this section of the manga pretty recently got a special omnibus release, so it's also the most timely release of content looking back at the region. Since the story of mainland Kanto had already been covered at the beginning of the series, this section follows up on it after the events of Gold and Silver and Ruby and Sapphire with slightly aged up protagonists living inside of a bigger world. The main story in the arc revolves around Deoxys coming to the Sevii Islands, but the echoes of the adventures in Johto and Hoenn can also firmly be felt. Like the real Silver is also here, for instance, exploring his potential familial relation to a certain someone. And the consequences of Groudon and Kyogre's battle in Hoenn sets off the events for Deoxys coming to Sevii to begin with. Greater than just the islands themselves, this story really captures the overall feeling of a FireRed or LeafGreen playthrough in this way. It's still Kanto, technically, with all the characters and places we love, but everything is more intricate and fleshed out now. There's a worldliness that wasn't present in the original Gen 1 games. You talk to people from other regions, the mechanics are more intricate, and of course there's plenty more Pokemon to get your hands on. Because this part is so involved with the larger plot of the series, the journey through the islands is a lot different than the one that you have in the games. But there is an attempt here to do both, so most of the familiar beats from the actual games are here, but at points they can be disjointed or give more or less attention than in the original material. It starts relatively similarly to the games, with Red and Blue going to Professor Oak's lab for Pokédex upgrades and tickets for the boat to the islands. But a revamped Team Rocket quickly throws things off track with their plot to gain control of the Deoxys that has been spotted on the islands. Because of this, 3 Island, 6 Island, and Naval Rock receive very little attention, if any at all. But on the other side of that, there are locations on the other islands, like Cape Brink or the Trainer Tower, that get explored more thoroughly than they do in the actual games. And the manga brings a lot of well thought out imagination to certain areas that portrays them in a way I genuinely prefer to the games. But again, what really seals the deal here is how the imagery is completely compatible with the base content. Like Cape Brink on 2 Island is technically geographically the same, but the girl who teaches your starter the ultimate moves has been completely fleshed out and poses these additional challenges in line with the wireless minigames you play at the island's game corner. Whereas in the actual games, this random girl at the top of the cape drops these ultimate moves on your starter, essentially no questions asked. So Adventures adds all this fanfare to the process, and then imagines this deeper story to go with it. It's just really, really cool. In this same vein, the Trainer Tower section is also a standout part of the story if you've ever visited the location in-game. In FireRed and LeafGreen, the Trainer Tower is this strange version of the Battle Tower situated at the northmost point of Sevii Island. And it's super weird, because it's this very technological facility with a futuristic and metallic feel. But it's on this island that is otherwise firmly rooted in the past. Sevii Island is extremely rugged and wild. There are ancient ruins waiting to be explored, and untamed wildlife to adventure through. So this tower is a very strange choice. Why is this obelisk of technology planted on what might be the most natural place in all the islands? Well, Adventures has a potential answer for this question. And in this story, the tower is actually a secret Team Rocket base that acts as a communication hub for their operations in the region, which is just awesome. You play up to this point, and the tower kind of asks the question just by being here. Why is this thing in this place? And the point of the tower in the story isn't just that explanation either, it's only the premise. The action is built entirely on top of it. The shonen battle shenanigans on top of the very real emotion in the characters carries things from there. That's the part I don't super want to get into, because hopefully this all can convince you to give it a try if you haven't already. Because if you love FireRed and LeafGreen, or really just Pokemon at all, this manga, and then further this part specifically, carry the core of that love through the imagination and whimsy that these games embody and can create in their players. I did have one concern reading it though, that maybe the barrier for entry was just a little too high, especially with that added complexity I mentioned earlier. A lot of very specific references and mechanics are incorporated into this specific story, and since I have a very, let's say, greater than normal level of interest in these games, I don't think it's exactly fair for me to judge how approachable they are in this regard. So instead, I was able to convince my friend Max, who has a much more passing interest, to read the volumes and then share a few thoughts. And he's also helping me edit this video. So thanks, Max. Take it away, buddy.
Hey y'all, this is Max, aka Seven Sirens here. If there's one thing to know about me, it's that I love manga. See my library for proof. Pokemon, while I've played since I was a kid, has always been a passing interest. And frankly, until I met Droomish, I didn't know that the Sevii Islands even existed, since I have never actually played FireRed LeafGreen. So I'm coming into this blank with just a love for a good manga, and a hope that this isn't written for babies. And whoa, I did not expect this. First of all, this is not a baby manga. Not that there's anything wrong with them. I will be discussing mild spoilers from here on out. Viewer be warned. This arc starts with the origin of Silver and Green, who were literally kidnapped as children in a bid to groom them into spy soldiers. I was aghast. Now, I don't know if I'm forgetting any major plots, but this was my first time seeing Pokemon be so serious. Of course, bad guys want to take over the universe, and that time Entei was a father come to mind, but child soldiers? I didn't know they could do that. So yeah, I was hooked from the very beginning. After that, we get to see Red and Blue in their prime, 16 years old, which means they're middle-aged by Pokemon standards. It was really interesting to see their dynamic through this. Frankly, I was expecting Blue to be like he was in the games and anime, a sniveling rich boy with a penchant for pranks. But no, he shows genuine camaraderie for Red with almost mentor-like qualities to him. I guess getting humbled by losing out on Champion could do that to a person. Anyway, Red was perhaps even more interesting. Far from the mysterious man atop Mount Silver, he is bursting with personality during this arc. He's a great friend, he's at tune with his Pokemon, and overall, I felt myself rooting for him the entire time. The most surprising parts for me were when his confidence falters. He loses his cool multiple times, whether it's being chastised and harassed by locals after being falsely accused of trying to destroy the Sevii Islands, or his inability to save his friends and Professor Oak from Deoxys and Team Rocket. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First off, Professor Oak gets tortured. Straight up. No one expects Professor Oak Wump, but it happens. This manga had actual stakes, which I really appreciated. Silver was another unexpected appreciation. He starts as mostly the B-plot, searching for his long-lost family with his Sneasel, and as we slowly reveal the plot, Silver becomes more and more important, tying in with Green and the Sevii Island story. It was honestly master-crafted. The big reveal of Giovanni being back in town was gag city for me, mostly because I looked like this. Hey, I know that guy! And then, the even crazier reveal is that Giovanni is looking for his missing son, and only Deoxys can help him locate the child. Well, wouldn't you know it, it was Silver all along! I'm not ashamed to say that I read the entire chapter with my jaw on the floor. Wow. Wow. I didn't even remember Silver until Droomish reminded me that he is in fact in the video games, so egg on my face. But hey, you're getting the raw truth from me here, and I want to be open and honest with you. Perhaps the best sequence in this manga arc is towards the end. The climax, you might even call it. When Red challenges Giovanni to a battle on a flying battleship. Just Deoxys versus Mewtwo. Red desperate to stop Giovanni's plot and save the people of Sevii Islands. It's honestly incredibly well done, and frankly, I was legitimately concerned that Red would not win. He had failed previously, and I figured it could very well happen again. The result, well, I think you should read it to find out, but let's just say that Red and Mewtwo are still alive to tell the tale. Overall, I have little negative to say. I think Green could have been more of a character and not just a piece of a puzzle, and there's a MacGuffin at the end that had me rolling my eyes, but hey, it's Pokemon, the good guys gotta win. Other memorable moments include, but are not limited to, the lore of Deoxys' creation, Ultima in all her strangeness, Lorelei, and the whole PC team who I know would destroy me in a Unite lobby. All in all, this manga arc gets a 9 out of 10 from me. I definitely want to go back and read more of the Adventures manga now. Maybe I'll even understand more of this arc that was lost to me. That's all from me, kicking it back to Droomish.
Alright, so there you have it. I really recommend this story. I also saved it for absolute last because I kind of view it as the ultimate memory for the Sevii Islands. You don't have to run an entire FireRed playthrough to be exposed to the unique feeling and perspective because the manga captures it pretty dang well. And so all in all, I would say that about does it. That's all of the living memory I could find for this beautiful region, and I fully attempted to leave no stone unturned. From the references to the tangents, these are the vagrant memories and daydreams brought about by a locale like no other. I feel like we were able to put together a couple of things about the fate of these beautiful islands, but a lot of the biggest questions seem largely unanswered or up to player interpretation. And so these fragments and remains are all we have left of a Pokemon region seemingly lost to the ages. I really hope that someday I get to go back there, but for now, I'm content with these dreams from another time. This is my favorite Pokemon region, and this video is what's left of the place. So if you're still here, I really hope you enjoyed it. This was a long-standing passion project of mine, and so there was a lot to get out and some tangents at points, but I just had to get it all out of my system, I guess. Let me know what you thought down below, give the video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it. And as always, thanks for watching. I'm surrounded by beauty. Droomish out.